Welcome to the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev, where we explore and share experiences, stories, and lessons 7 days a week from across the games industry, helping you make the best game you can. Stay tuned for today's episode. Good morning, Overload Nation. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Dev Talk, talking to game developers from across the world to bring you experiences, stories, and lessons 7 days a week. Today, I am joined with Rodrigo Peralta to talk about his game Mazerat from his studio Sureksu Games. Rodrigo, talk about yourself first, please, and how you got into the games industry.
All right. First of all, thanks for inviting me. Very glad to be here. Well, I started making games when I was a kid. I started out with RPG Maker, and then I started learning a little bit of Python. But for a couple of years, I sort of left that behind. And then one day, I was given the opportunity to join a foundation which teaches software here in my town. And I joined up as a teacher for programming games. And that's more or less how I started. Then I got into then I discovered that there's this whole world, this whole indie scene. I did not know anything about all of this, and I started participating in game jams, and slowly by slowly, I've been joining the community. It's been really fun.
So, tell us about the games you worked on before. What were they like? So, they were game jams, so they'd be quite small.
Yeah, yeah. I was working with a friend at that time. Um, Mostly for I think my first game was for the Flappy Jam. I don't know if you remember that one.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
we made a game called Floppy Jam, which is just basically like a helicopter game, but you're a diskette and you have to avoid. No, you're a diskette driver, and you have to avoid diskettes from getting jammed. Basically, it was a very simple game. We made in a couple of like that was my first actual game. I made in a couple of like 3 days or 4 days, something like that. Then we made another couple
Mm-hmm.
more, all less than a week games. Nothing like this one, which took a few months.
Sounds cool. Sounds cool. So, tell us about your studio. How many people work there? What's the structure? What kind of softwares do you have? What's the workflow?
All right. We started officially in January of this year, so we're pretty new.
Mm.
We consist. We started as two members, me as the artist and a friend of mine as a programmer. I originally have a foundation in programming. I have a degree in computer science, but slowly I'm trying to learn art, and well, I suppose my objective is to become a game artist. So we started two of us, and when we had our first prototype of the game, we managed to add to the company a third partner who would take care of the business side of things. So, like I said, we're just now starting out. We've got a lot to learn. Fortunately, the community is very helpful and friendly, both local and worldwide.
Hmm. And so you've been working on Mazerat since January.
Yes.
Okay. So speaking of which, tell us about your game Mazerat and what you wanted the player to experience.
All right. Uh, well, Mazerat is basically it's a puzzle game. As a kid, I always loved puzzles where you had to make light or lasers connect with something. I still haven't been able to find the game that originally was the idea, but we wanted to combine that with a Sokoban play style, and different types of blocks available. What we wanted the player to experience is the same things we did when we were making the game, and finding out that the new blocks that we created somehow change the way you use the original blocks. For example, when you add the moving block, the normal block has a new use. It's a way of stopping the movement of the moving block. For another example, the biggest mind blowing example is when we made the teleporter, we realized we could add a second floor to the game. And now it would be Sokoban on first floor and second floor, and normal blocks could be used as bridges, connecting floors, and moving blocks as a means of transportation. That moment of, when someone's playing your game and they go, aha! That's the part that we really love to hear when we see someone playing our game.
Hmm. Funny you should mention that about the origin of the laser. I can remember in 2001, no, 2003, I was playing a game for the Game Boy Color, and it was, I think, a Lego game, but it was like this Lego action hero kind of game.
Uh huh.
And it was from above, similar layout to Mazerat, but Lego and all the rest. And there was these characters that had to progress through the level to reach the villain's hideout, his lair. And there was a mechanic that involved lasers, and they would like have to be shot into these pinpoint areas so you could progress the level. But also they mixed up a little bit by introducing these angled mirrors.
Ah, yes. We also had we had originally angled mirrors,
Uh-huh.
but it's a mechanic we eventually had to take out of the game.
Hmm. But the overall point is you said you don't know where it originated from. But when you said that, and as I was playing the game,
Yeah.
this game, and I can't remember what it's called, Game Boy Color around 2000, 2003. I can't remember what it was called, but I remember playing it, and it had lasers and mirrors in, and it reminded me of that.
Could be, could be.
Hmm. So, what is it you wanted the player to experience? Because there's a bit of narrative kind of at the start,
Yes.
So you want to elaborate at all?
Well, I suppose, like I said, the experience of puzzle solving, of realizing those same mechanics can be used over and over and over again. The story, I think it was we haven't really planned it. Like I said, since it's our first game, lots of things started popping up. Things we should have. Well, I haven't said this, but Mazer originally started as a project, a side project for my the programmer friend, and it eventually became into our first game. Because of this, we had lots of problems because we hadn't originally stated a platform or a monetization method, how we were going to get money. We had lots of problems. There was no story
Hmm.
to the game, and it sort of went building itself slowly. So we never actually thought of experience per se as what the play more than just an intellectual challenge.
I get you. So speaking of problems, then, how did you go about promoting the game? What worked well and what didn't work so well?
Well, the only promotion we have done so far is for our Greenlight page. We're trying to get votes for the game. It was mostly an experience. We really wanted to know what it's like on being on Greenlight. It's a lot of first experiences for us. And honestly, everything we have done so far has not worked very well.
Interesting.
We've tried getting,
So,
sorry, yes?
yeah, go on. You were saying you've tried getting.
Retweets. We've gotten tons of retweets. We've written mails. We've tried writing mails to small press, YouTubers. We've gone on Reddit. We've shared it on Flash game portals. None has actually redirected much traffic to Steam. Most of the votes we have on Greenlight have come from people who actually saw us on the Greenlight page, and the remainder are votes from our friends and people in the local game development community.
Hmm.
So we've had lots of trouble with actually promoting the game, which of course we have no experience in.
Is there anything that you've done that has worked at all,
Uh,
or worked specifically well for this kind of game, or a place that's good that you
uh,
discovered that was cool?
Well, the thing that worked and helped a lot was, like I said, the local game dev community, which we shared the game on several pages. That
Hmm.
that got us quite a bit of votes. There are several Latin American game development communities here, and they were very helpful.
Oh, interesting. Do you mind naming a few at all, if you can remember?
Well, there are some ones here from the city, Cordoba. There's another one called Community de Desarrolladores Latinoamericanos, and
Hmm.
as far as I can remember, most of the other ones were shared by one of my partners.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, how did you go about funding the game, and what methods worked and what didn't work?
Well, we don't actually have any operational costs because all three partners of the business are currently working without salary, and we currently don't have an office. But we did, however, manage to acquire angel investors to cover up initial startup costs like a copyright, setting up the company, paying for the website. We had lots of initial startup costs.
Hmm. And just for the viewers who don't understand that or know what that is, could you just explain briefly what angel investor is?
Ah, yes. An angel investor is usually an investor, who doesn't expect or doesn't expect a complete return or even a return on his initial investment. It's normally friends, colleagues, family members who are uh, angel investors.
Hmm. I get you. Okay. So, what was cut from the game, and why?
Well, like I said before, we did have some initial planned out mechanics removed because even though they were very pleasing to see, such as the mirror, which we mentioned earlier, that bent the laser 90 degrees, we also had a bomb that exploded all 8 tiles around it. They weren't reusable mechanics. They did not affect most of the other blocks significantly. For example, the mirror blocks practically only affected the laser, and the bombs only affected the blocks that were breakable. And the bombs also changed the game from a puzzle game to more of an action puzzle. And it really wasn't what we were going for. We wanted a game where the player could sit, look at the screen, think about what he was going to do, not a running around bomb exploding game.
Hmm.
This was especially noticeable when we added the second floor because the mirror only works on one floor at a time, and the bomb was extremely visually confusing. Was it blowing up both floors, only one? It was weird. They had to go.
Interesting. Okay. So, what was the biggest thing you learnt while working on the game?
Prototyping, prototyping, prototyping. This is
Hmm. Cool.
definitely the most important part of game develop. I think what made Mazerat into an enjoyable game was the fact that we have redone it several times. It started out as a top view game with continuous movement and ended up being an isometric game with tile based movement. And each iteration we did on the game design allowed further iterations. For example, once it was no longer top view, we could now work with a two floor system without confusing the player.
Hmm. The way I see it is that the game is like a plant that's growing upwards, and it wants to go its own direction, and you've got to constantly nudge it into going one certain direction, focusing on one kind of objective. Not going to action puzzles, but maintaining that puzzle element. And that's one. I think one way is through iteration, and that's amazing to know that some people put emphasis on the prototyping. And
Exactly.
I think we have a title of the video right there as well. I'm curious then, what was the worst thing that happened, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, this one's easy. We once went to an event where we had to show our game, and it wasn't completely working. The laser was doing some funky things, but we were sure we were going to have it working by time to show it, and we were wrong. We were actually programming laser on the bus. I didn't even sleep that day. We got to the
Hmm.
event, we went to a couple of talks around 3 p.m. We go back to the hostel, we keep coding until 1 a.m. I had still not slept. We wake up at 8 a.m., start coding again. Around 12, we go to one talk we really wanted to hear, but nonetheless, we kept programming during the talk. And eventually, we practically had it running around at 1 o'clock, which was when we had to show our game. It worked all right. It crashed sometimes near the final levels, but people managed to play it and enjoy it. So I guess the problem that people should try to avoid is to make a good planning schedule and
Hmm.
do not underestimate how complicated sometimes some things can get.
Wow. Okay. Not underestimate how complicated things can get.
Yeah, I mean sometimes you think, oh, we just have to program this laser to bounce off this mirror, and then suddenly you
Wow. Okay.
realize, but what if the laser goes through the laser? Then we've got laser stacked on top of laser. You've got an X laser, and it was pretty complicated.
Wow. Okay. Because before you mentioned that, literally, I was going through my mind thinking, well, a laser. That's like a single directional kill area, and that activates a certain switch. That's not too complicated. But then you mention things like, what if this happened or that happened? It's like, yeah, it can get exponentially more complicated. Although I think the best way to balance that is to make sure the level design makes it so that scenario is impossible.
Yeah, which is what we try. Well, one of the things we try to do because we didn't manage to fix some final things, some combination of positions which would crash the game. So we basically didn't allow it in the game.
Mm.
The laser
Okay.
actually one of the things I'd like to mention also that the laser definitely changes the game style because it's like an invisible wall. If you go through a laser, it kills you. So moving the lasers actually changes the setup of the level. So the laser itself it was a really interesting mechanic.
Oh, definitely. I felt that as well. Speaking of mechanics, though, what was the idea behind counting the steps and how many times it takes to complete the level?
Oh, that was very fun to do for us, at least. I don't know about the gamers, but because originally we wanted some system of besides the puzzle, a judge not a judging system, but a scoring system. We originally thought about time, but that was very far away from the whole puzzle theme. How fast you do it. Also, it was very dramatic. There was very little differences. I mean, so we came up with a very interesting thing, which was counting the amount of steps and how to solve the puzzle. For example, and it was very fun for us because it was both developers competing to see who could do the levels in least steps. So we were actually enjoying our own game. That was something that was really, really fun. We would sit down and say 89 steps, 76 steps, and then all of a sudden one of us would scream 45. And we were like, how did you do that? and it
Mm-hmm.
and it really drastically changes the game because you're not only having to get the laser to a certain position and getting yourself to the exit, but you have to try to do it while saving up as many steps as you can. So sometimes instead of going around twice, you can save yourself one of those loops if you pull a little block and you do a little few steps, and it gets really complicated towards the end.
Yes, it really got me thinking about how I could complete each level as soon as possible and making a few steps as possible.
It,
At the
it
start, there was some basic puzzles, and I was thinking, well, I can figure out all sorts of ways, but when I count the steps, and it's like I don't want to take too long at this. I don't mind restarting, but so
yeah,
it's interesting um, a level a way an interesting mechanic to introduce like competition in the game.
yes. And in fact, for example, we did a lot of we tried to make a lot of psychological into the game. For example, the first level, it had some people really they couldn't get the perfect score
Hmm.
because the way of getting the perfect score was leaving the laser at the first column and going around there and then pulling it all the way back. What people were doing is they were always pulling it to the column closest to the reactor, which was 2 spaces wide, because in their minds the column closest to the reactor was the best place to leave the laser. But if they used the column that was furthest away and shorter to go around, they would get the least amount of steps.
I'll have to check the video to see if I did that. I'm very curious now. So I'm also very curious about any game dev purchases or investments that you made, whether it was a software license, a top quality piece of hardware or equipment, or simply a comfortable chair and a good desk.
Well, I have to say that the best purchase we did so far, at least from my perspective, is definitely my Wacom tablet. I
Hmm.
cannot even begin to explain how difficult it is to, especially when you start out, to draw and animate pixel art.
Oh, I can imagine.
I mean, the main reason Mazerat is done in pixel art because when we started, I didn't have a tablet, so
Hmm.
I was slaving away drawing with a mouse, and I still have nightmares about animating the rat's tail with pixel art because drawing that curve in pixel art it was taking so long. And honestly, I love pixel art. I love it. I love games like The Last Door. That is an amazing piece of art, but it requires a great deal of art experience and knowledge of form to be able to work with it so quickly. I mean, what used to take me days with pixel art now takes me a couple of hours with a tablet and Photoshop.
That's really cool to know. I've only ever really used a Wacom tablet for Photoshop and ZBrush and such. It's yeah, ZBrush and such. Yeah, it's very useful. I can't imagine how you'd want to have to create anything artistic without a Wacom tablet. It just speeds everything up, and even with pixel art, I especially can't imagine it because it's so tediously clicking and clicking. But with a tablet, you just got to press it, you just got to get it right in the right order. It's so much easier. Not to mention shading in as well. It'd be even easier to get that 3D look and the shadows and the tonal value.
Yeah.
And no doubt it makes animation in pixel art a lot easier as well, which to be honest blows my mind because that's got to be very difficult to get it looking smooth, and it's pose to pose or follow follow through must be very difficult, but with a Wacom tablet even easier surely.
Yes, definitely.
So that Wacom tablet, beautiful. Okay, so what game developer related books, lectures or learning resources can you recommend?
Well, first of all, I recommend, especially if you're starting out, reading everything you can find on pixelprospector.com.
Oh, definitely.
I to this day I still use it as a reference site. For example, I need some sounds or something. I go there, I check what websites are available for sounds or anything. Uh,
Hmm.
it's really got tons of content. To this day still use it. If you want to learn to program, I normally suggest the forums documentation of the engine or framework or library you're using. I've worked with several different technologies, and this has always worked for me. I started out with SFML, I worked with Hex, now I'm learning Unity. And normally the community around that language or that engine has enough material. You probably don't need a book.
That's amazing. um Here's a thought I just had, literally
Yeah,
just now, as you were talking about Pixel Prospector. I think it'd be worthwhile trying to get Daily Dev Talk on there, don't you think?
that would be interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't think of that just now. What's even weirder is I didn't discover Pixel Prospector until like yesterday, about 24 hours ago, on the 22nd of July. So that's even cooler.
Yeah, especially if, for example, I have a hard time finding out workflows of professionals. I have no idea. There is very little content on how artists do their art for the games. For example,
Hmm.
just yesterday I discovered software like Spine, which is a 2D. It's a software for animating 2D, and it's incredible and it's wonderful. And I've never even read about it before. So it would be
Uh,
nice to have other professionals on talking about all this stuff there.
and you found Spine via Pixel Prospector?
No, no, no. I found Spine while Googling how an animate workflow towards Unity. And one of
Ah.
the results there mentioned Spine, Spriter, and all these softwares that I didn't even know existed, but seemed
Mm.
very interesting, very, very nice.
Yeah, cool. So speaking of like software and such,
Yes.
do you have an like an Evernote or Trello? Do you have a useful or productivity enhancing software, app, extension, or website worth sharing?
We actually work a lot with Trello. We have
Mm-hmm.
about four boards. One's a daily board, a weekly board, and a monthly board. And the last one is a to be assigned board. And what we do is we take tasks from the whenever we have something new, we assign it to the to be assigned. We pass all the tasks to monthly. From monthly, we pass to weekly. From weekly, we pass to daily, and we mainly work around the daily board. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
helping our productivity. Like for example, we get into work and we see what do we have to do. This perfect, we do it. And it also helps us to know, like for example, why wasn't this done last week? What happened here? This and it's really helpful, Trello.
Interesting. Keeping track. Cool. Cool. I didn't really think of that before. Having a daily, weekly, and what was it? Weekly, daily, monthly, and to do to be
Yes.
assigned. Interesting. Cool. So, what advice, Rodrigo, can you give to aspiring game developers, small indie studios, and people trying to get to where you are today?
Well, I'm not really that far into this, so I probably can't be of much help, but I will say two things. The first one, like I said before, remember to prototype. No idea will ever be good from the start. Iteration is really what makes good games. Um, and second, if you don't have a knack for business, for example, which I do not have, it's very useful sometimes to partner up with or maybe even hire someone if you have the funds to do that for you so you can actually concentrate on what you really like doing, which is making games. And
Hmm.
I suppose that's
Okay.
my biggest advice.
Okay. Cool. That's cool because I'm thinking about when Game Overload is grown to start my own studio. Because honestly, as you might have as you might have heard before, Get Overload Nation in a
Yes.
few episodes is that unintended consequence of talking to loads of developers, more than 2 dozen at this rate, is I'm thinking of starting my own studio.
That's wonderful.
I don't know when. I want to get this business Game Overload sorted first, built a large and running by itself, and then expand into development and publishing. So publishing as well, because it's like I have the skill, of the community, and the skills, so it's like may as well go one step beyond.
That'd be wonderful because we need a lot of indie publishing.
Why do you say that? What's the dilemma exactly?
Well, um, I suppose we haven't gotten much into it yet. We haven't contacted many people, so I can't actually say if it's bad the indie publishing that is right now. I have no idea. But I was just saying, the more the better. I haven't actually we haven't actually had the chance to write to or work with any publishing studio yet.
Do you think that's because most of the publishers work with AAA?
No, actually, there is a list. Let me see if I can find it here of indie friendly publishers. Um, I can't find it right now, but I can send it to you when I can. For example,
Please
the,
do.
the first one that comes to mind is Team 17. Team
All
17
right.
is
Okay.
actually we all know it from Worms, is
Hmm.
an indie friendly publisher. There's quite a few. Some are towards mobile, and others are towards PC or console. There's quite a few. It's a small list. That's what I'm saying. We need more. The more the better. The more the merrier. I think the list had
Cool.
like 13 publishers.
Interesting. Interesting. Cool. I didn't know about this, and that's interesting. I'm gonna All the more reason to start a publishing house as well. Cool concept. So, Rodrigo, what is next for you, and what's the best way to contact you?
Well, we're trying to work on our second game. We've made several prototypes, discarded some things. We're trying to finish Mazerat. We're thinking maybe Mazerat's going to work much better on mobile, probably. So we might get that going on there. And the best way to contact us is through our website. You have all our contact information, all our mails there. We've also got Twitter and Facebook. Website is Sureksu, sureksu.com. We're also on Facebook /Sureksu and Twitter /Sureksu.
Cool. Plenty of ways to contact you.
The more the merrier.
Yeah, exactly. So, Rodrigo, it appears that we're out of time, actually, for this episode of the Daily Dev Talk. It was really great to talk to you, and prototype, something that no studio can go without.
Pretty much. It was really nice to be here. This was very fun, and I guess we both learned a lot of things.
Oh, yes. So I wish you well on Mazerat. I'm interested to know how it's going to work on mobile. Maybe you have directional arrows at all. I'm not sure how that would.
We were thinking dividing the screen into halves, and one half would be directional controls, the other half would be tap for grab release.
Oh, maybe.
We'll have to prototype.
Interesting. Suddenly, it sounds like the Game Boy Color in a way. We're going to have the whole thing separated. But it was great talking to you.
Likewise.
Stay tuned, Overload Nation. More videos to come. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev. If you are a game developer that wants to get your name and game out there and to share your experiences and stories, or you have feedback or opinions of the show, then contact me at info@gameoverload.co.uk. That's info@gameoverload.co.uk. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. More to come.